Hello everyone, and welcome to today's session, Ransomware Reality Check, Separating the Hype from the Hurt. My name is Shannon Lane and I will be your moderator for today. It's a pleasure to welcome you and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be with us today. We have a great agenda for you today. We'll dive deep into ransomware and look at the ransomware development lifecycle, real-world examples of ransomware attacks and what we've learned from them, and cost-effective tactics that you can put to action right now to protect your organisation. Please note that you can send us questions throughout the webinar. At the end of the presentation, we will do a quick Q&A session and answer as many questions as we have time for. The session is a joint initiative from Security Innovation and Shearwater's Friendly Phishing. And I'll just spend a couple of minutes to give you background on those two organisations. Security Innovation has been a trusted partner for cybersecurity risk analysis and mitigation for the world's leading companies. These include Microsoft, Sony, General Motors, Disney, Google, and Dell. Recognized as a leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for Security Awareness Computer-Based Training, Security Innovation is dedicated to securing and protecting sensitive data in the world's most challenging environments. Friendly Phishing, developed by Shearwater, is Australia's first integrated phishing awareness training and simulation solution. Friendly Phishing allows you to educate staff about phishing threats, nurture their awareness with ongoing simulated phishing campaigns, and measure improvement across your entire organisation. Okay, so let's get started by introducing today's speakers. Kevin Poniatowski is a senior security instructor and engineer at Security Innovation. Kevin entered the application security field in 2007 with Security Innovation, where he has split his time between application security course development and delivering instructor-led courses. Damien Grace is the founder and general manager at Friendly Phishing. Damien has led the ethical hacking team at Shearwater Solutions for over 8 years, where he saw the impact of phishing on organisations firsthand. Friendly Phishing, the training product he founded, currently provides training for thousands of users across Australia and New Zealand. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Kevin, and we might just take a moment whilst those slides kick in.
Thank you very much, Shannon. I'm waiting for presenter status to be given to me. And there we go. So hello everyone, thank you all for joining us today. I am going to start talking about the beginnings of ransomware and how it has evolved over the years, and kind of go through that process, because it was a little surprising as I dug into this material, because we know it's a huge problem, but it's interesting to find out the changes that have occurred in ransomware since it's begun. And what's fascinated me was ransomware actually was first invented, in theory, in 1996 by two cryptographers from Columbia University. And the slide walks us through the steps of how, in theory, this ransomware was created. So first, an attacker would create a piece of malicious software and include in that piece of software a cryptographic key pair. Well, the public key would be included in the malicious software, but the attacker would create this cryptographic key pair, obviously keep the private key for themselves. The public key is included in the malware. Then step two, somehow the malware is introduced onto a victim's machine, and once there, it generates a symmetric encryption key, and then uses that symmetric encryption key to encrypt the victim's files. Once those files are encrypted, the public key encrypts the symmetric key, and then the malware notifies the victims of this attack. So this was presented in 1996, long before ransomware ever came into my scope. In 1996, I was busy working as an intern on a web application creating SQL injection vulnerabilities in the code. And unfortunately, that's not a joke. That's actually what I was doing, because I didn't know any better in 1996. But there were brilliant people in 1996 thinking about security issues. So now let's fast forward a little bit to what step 4 is. And the whole goal of ransomware is profit. Now, what's interesting about this is how the attackers make their money. And what we're going to see is that's not the result always of ransomware. There's a lot of other side effects of ransomware, but profit is often the motivation of these attackers. So in 1996, two cryptographers came up with this rather evil idea, and we see the results of it today. But let's continue on with the beginnings of ransomware. Well, actually, let's get, I'm sorry, not the beginning, but where are we actually today, right now in 2017, before I get into the evolution of ransomware? In the first half of 2017, corporations account for 42% of ransomware incidents. Now, compare that to last year and the year before, when it was really only about 30%. So ransomware is targeting corporations more than the previous years. Now, ransomware began targeting individual users for the most part. But it seems attackers have found a ripe hunting ground within organizations. And from past results, it seems if one machine can be corrupted with ransomware within an organization, that ransomware can then spread throughout that organization. And the attackers are finding it's much more lucrative. In the first half of 2017, the average ransom demand from this malicious software was $544 per infected device. So as an individual user, this is painful but doable. As an organization, if you have thousands of machines that have had their data encrypted, well, 544 times thousands and thousands is a lot of money, and it becomes really, really painful. And this data actually came from Symantec's Internal Threat Security Report, which was released just at the end of this August. So this is still pretty fresh news. So the challenges for these attackers that we have today is, one, how do they get that malicious software that includes the ransomware onto victims' computers? And then once that happens, how does the attacker then receive payment from the victims without getting caught? It's not as if the victims can write a check to the attackers and the attackers can cash into the bank. So even though this was theorized in 1996, attackers had to do a lot of imagining and a lot of creative work to actually get it to where ransomware is today, which unfortunately is just incredibly damaging to us. Well, let's start with a little bit about how is it installed on victims' machines. And unfortunately, there's many different ways that this can happen. Could trick a user into opening a malicious email attachment. And we know this has been a delivery method of malware for many, many years now. And it still works, unfortunately. Ransomware could be installed by copying a file to a machine that appears to be legitimate. So perhaps some kind of an update to an application. Well, it looks like it's an update, but it's not. Ransomware could be installed by downloading malicious applications. So maybe an executive is given their iPhone to a child, or not an iPhone, maybe an Android. And then that child downloads what they think is a game. Well, it might be a game, but it's also ransomware. Victims could be tricked into visiting malicious websites, or it could be a legitimate website that has been hacked in some fashion to deliver a malicious application down to the browser or onto a victim's machine. So there's lots of different ways for ransomware to be introduced on victims' machines. And if you notice, a lot of these, they've been commonly used for other types of malicious software installations. And they take advantage of often users who haven't had any training on how to protect themselves against this kind of malicious software. So ransomware is just kind of piggybacking and using the same methods as malicious software has been using for many, many years to become installed on victims' machines. But let's jump into how ransomware kind of went, what's the word I want? It kind of went worldwide. The first really well-known ransomware attack was a piece of malicious software called CryptoLocker. And CryptoLocker came on the scene in September of 2013 and was very active up until May 2014. And this piece of malicious software was able to propagate by using infected email attachments. And with those infected email attachments came usually some form of social engineering, tricking users into opening that attachment. An email that pretends to be coming from a human resources department, asking for information, or it's an email that pretends to be coming from a finance department and has a Excel spreadsheet titled employees payroll or something like that. Any kind of social engineering. And attackers, their mindset is they don't have to get everyone to open that attachment. They just have to get one person in the organization to open that attachment. And once that attachment is open, the malicious software installs itself and the ransomware starts working. And so here on this side we have a picture of actually what happens when CryptoLocker is running on a machine. And if you notice in the bottom left-hand corner of that picture, there is a deadline for how long a person could wait before they actually pay the money that the attackers want to, well, at least in the victim's minds, restore those files that have been encrypted. And unfortunately, that doesn't always happen, we learned over the past few years when it comes to ransomware. So this CryptoLocker was really one of the first ones on the scene that made the mainstream media. Now, CryptoLocker targeted Microsoft Windows users. And if you're going to write your malicious software, apparently go after the market leader, and that's exactly what CryptoLocker did. However, in May 2014, an international organized effort took down the botnet that had been used to distribute CryptoLocker, and it was called Operation Tovar. And there's a lot of information about Operation Tovar out there if you're interested in learning more about it. But it was able to actually shut down the use of that version of CryptoLocker. And then, above and beyond just shutting it down, once the information of the victims of CryptoLocker was gained by this Operation Tovar, an online tool was created to actually help victims decrypt their files, which was fantastic news. However, the bad news was the attackers were estimated to have extorted between $3 and $5 million US from their victims. So let's think about how much effort went into creating this software versus the payoff. Now, this software probably would have cost the creators, if you look into the hours they spent creating this, let's guess maybe $10,000 US, and they were able to extort $3 to $5 million US from their victims. So ransomware was incredibly lucrative with this example of CryptoLocker. And this is when it absolutely became terrifying for the rest of us. Well, that was kind of the beginning of the huge ransomware attacks. And this year just got even more awful than the previous years. On Friday, May 12th in 2017, this year, more than 230,000 computers were infected in less than 24 hours by the WannaCry piece of ransomware. And this occurred in over 150 countries. This made huge news in all of the major newspapers around the world. It was a huge, devastating blow by this ransomware. And what really was heartbreaking about WannaCry was it targeted a known vulnerability in different versions of the Windows operating system. And in particular, it targeted the server's message block version 1 protocol. And this was a known vulnerability and actually had been patched. Well, when I say patched, I mean a patch had been released on March 14th, 2017. So the patch had been released 2 months before WannaCry targeted this vulnerability. And when Microsoft released that patch, this vulnerability was known as being critical. And yet 2 months later, many organizations had not patched their machines and were vulnerable to this WannaCry ransomware. Now here's what was even more terrifying about WannaCry was it had the ability to spread itself across an organization's network. It had the ability to be an old school worm. It was self-propagating. So it seems like with each new version of ransomware that comes out, the attackers have added a new twist to it. They have been very creative and have learned from what they have been successful with in the past and are adding that to each new version of this malicious software. So not only could WannaCry self-propagate itself across an organization's network, it would also attempt to spread itself across the internet by scanning random IP blocks, looking for addresses to find other vulnerable computers. Absolutely terrifying. And the speed at which it did this was just, I hate to use the word fascinating because this was such a damaging attack, but this was a really powerful piece of malicious software. But surprisingly, WannaCry actually was not a huge moneymaker for its creators. Its impact was in the damage it did to work stoppages in large and small organizations around the world in the 150 countries where machines had been victim to this ransomware. So huge organizations, multinational corporations, United Kingdom National Health Service. This made huge news where hospitals had to postpone patients' surgeries because their computers were down. FedEx here in the United States and around and other countries had huge issues due to these WannaCry ransomware. Many organizations around the world just lost control of their machines and were unable to access important data. And so this was the first one that I became aware of that it really hammered organizations. And this is just a very short list of organizations that have suffered damage from the WannaCry ransomware. So the creators did not make a ton of money off of this, but the damage was incredible. So hundreds of thousands of machines in more than 150 countries. Now the direct ransom cost estimated around $10 million. Now, that's estimated. That is more than what we saw with CryptoLocker. However, the business interruptions costs could possibly add up to $8 billion. That was from an article from CSO Online, and so it'll be interesting over time to see if that is an accurate estimate or not. But while the attackers are making millions of dollars, the damage that they're creating is in the billions of dollars, and that's just a terrifying number. I know if I was an executive in an organization, that would definitely be keeping me up at night. And unfortunately, we're not done. Ransomware continues. And just, what is it, not even, 3 weeks ago, NotPetya Ransomware has infected machines around the world, and the international organization Maersk came out and said this Windows ransomware attack may actually cost it $300 million. Just one organization says one piece of malicious software could cost them upwards of $300 million. Now, this version of ransomware, in some places has been called NotPetya, some places have called it Petya, so that's still kind of up in the air. But this piece of ransomware began appearing in banks, airports, power companies in the Ukraine, Russia, and parts of Europe. And now the way this spread was completely different than the others. Now, the police in the Ukraine confirmed that an accounting software package called Medoc that was very commonly used within the Ukraine had been compromised and was actually being used as an infection vector. It was the updating software component of the Medoc accounting software that was being used to spread the NotPetya ransomware. So it wasn't an email attachment. It wasn't taking advantage of a vulnerability like the Petya ransomware did. This actually compromised a piece of accounting software that the attackers knew was being used in widely within that part of the world, and then found a way to compromise the updating component. So that's a lot of work to spread this piece of ransomware. So the motivation of this piece of malicious software may not have necessarily been profit. It may have been potentially more political. Now, it's hard to say, but it certainly wouldn't be a surprise. So we've talked about how ransomware has changed and the different avenues it uses to get on victims' machines, but now let's just talk a little bit about how does the attacker receive payment from the victims without getting caught, because that's an important part of this equation. And it comes down to Bitcoin and other digital currencies. Bitcoin is stored in an online wallet, and each online wallet has its own unique identification number. And one of the benefits of Bitcoin is that these transactions are anonymous. Whenever Bitcoin is traded, these transactions are recorded in a public ledger. However, there isn't any identifying personal information of either the trader or the receiver of this Bitcoin. So now it's not perfectly anonymous, though. This public ledger has been used in the past to trace the movement of Bitcoins, but this is a very complicated task because often these trades are international. These trades are being performed over international borders, so that makes it incredibly complicated to trace the money, which makes it, obviously easier for attackers to find a way to then launder this Bitcoin into actual dollars that they can spend to, I guess, pay the things that attackers need. I'm guessing like rent and food and utilities. So in what we've seen recently is how much money the attackers are making using these Bitcoin transfers. In June, a South Korean web hosting company agreed to pay 397 Bitcoins to decrypt data stored on 153 different Linux servers. So in this case, it wasn't a Windows operating system that was had their data encrypted. It was Linux servers in this case. Now, 397 Bitcoins, that is just over $1 million US. However, the original demand was for 550 Bitcoins. So in this case, the web hosting company was able to negotiate a reduced fee. However, that is not something I would rely upon if my data was encrypted, unfortunately. But in this case, this web hosting company actually had to pay over $1 million US down from the original demand. So, and what's even scarier, with this version of ransomware that was used on these Linux machines, that malicious software had been waiting for several months before it demanded payment. And the reason why this ransomware just sat there for a while was it was ensuring that all of the data backups of that organization had also been encrypted. And that is one of the strategies that we have been talking about for a while to protect ourselves, is backing up our data, backing up our data. Well, this specific ransomware, it stuck around and hung out for a while, waiting for all of the data to be slowly encrypted and then backed up, overwriting the previous backups that hadn't been encrypted before alerting that organization that their data had been encrypted. So absolutely terrifying, and I'm sure this is not the end of this story. Our attackers are very creative, and it's going to take a definite, a lot of thinking power and effort for us to begin to slow this tide of ransomware. But now that is the end of my section of today's webinar, so I'd like to throw it and do our first poll.
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin. Before I hand it over to Damien, we are conducting a little bit of primary research today, and we have a couple of polls that we will be running just to take a few minutes. The first poll question is, have you had any ransomware incidents in your organization in the past 2 years? And the options there are yes, no, or I don't know. We'll probably leave it open for 20 minutes, 20 seconds even, rather than 20 minutes. And what we'll do is we'll feed this information back to you at the conclusion of this session as well. Okay, great. So we'll just launch the second question now. The second poll question is, what do you think is your organization's biggest challenge when it comes to ransomware threats? Is it your vulnerability management posture? Is it your policy and process? Or is it your staff security awareness posture? We'll again just wait a few seconds while we get all the responses in. Okay, thank you again. Now I'll hand over to Damien, who will be providing some tips on cost-effective tactics that you can put into action right now to protect your organization from ransomware. Thank you, Damien.
Thanks, Shannon, and hello, everyone. So thank you very much, Kevin, for that information. I think you provided a really good background, and it's going to really help us moving forward into this section where we're going to change tact a little bit, and we're going to start to look at actionable things that you guys can do to help protect yourselves from ransomware and similar style of attacks, and to really help you understand the environment that we're currently facing. So to start off with, we're going to move into a bit of an understanding phase. So we need to understand the landscape, we need to understand what's going on within the environment, and there's a number of factors that we need to prepare for and to look at to really put ourselves in the best place and the best position to be able to protect ourselves. So let's look at a few of these individually. First one is understanding the landscape. So Kevin, he obviously helped us there understand the landscape dramatically, and I'm going to cover on a couple of things in a second as well to go to sort of highlight just how much the landscape has changed of late. We're then going to focus on how you can bolster your defenses, how you can prepare yourself, what you need to know, where you need to focus your efforts and your time, and how you can really make sure that you're as prepared as possible going into this. Next, we're going to start to look at how you can train your people, and it's not just in things like general awareness training. There is a number of items, a number of different ways that you can prepare your people, that you can train your people, and so you can make them active in your security posture, and also help you change the culture within the organization. And at some point, you will be getting attacked. The way that things are at the moment, and again, you'll see in a second, it's almost guaranteed that you're going to be running into some sort of attack at some time in the future. And so you need to be ready for that. You need to be able to survive that attack and make sure that you come out of it unscathed. And then once you've got through that, how do you learn? How do you learn from those? What lessons are there to take? How do you evolve? And then keep on going through all of these stages to make sure that your organization stays on track with current trends, that is always at the pinnacle of these trends and not getting left behind and not getting attacked without preparation. So let's move into those a little bit. So first of all, understanding the landscape. So again, Kevin's done a great job here of providing some really good information, and there was a couple of things that I stumbled across in the last week that I wanted to share with you as well. The first one is this graph here. So this is essentially the percentage of new families of misleading apps, etc., that have been identified roughly in the last sort of 10, 11, 12 years. So basically from 2005 to mid-2016. And it's pretty interesting to see that there was actually some ransomware style attacks that started back in 2005, but they sort of petered out pretty quickly. They weren't really taking hold. And a lot of the things that we saw, and you guys probably remember them just as well as I do, things like the fake AV and the misleading apps trying to get you to install them, and they do nothing but infect your machine. And as you can see, as we start to hit late 2009 through to 2010, we start seeing a lot more of those CryptoLocker, crypto ransomware style attacks, to the points where now in 2016 on this graph, it's pretty much entirely what we're seeing. So they've really started to ramp up. And that also coincides quite nicely with what Kevin said before about the Bitcoin. Bitcoin came out in 2009, and as Bitcoin started to gain popularity, you can see there that the bad guys really went, okay, now I can see how I can make money from this. Now I can see how I can make this profitable, and really gravitated to this with gusto. To highlight that a little bit stronger, this is also an interesting graph from F-Secure. So basically the last 5 years, these are the different styles of crypto variants that have been released into the wild. And you can see back in 2011, 2013, there really wasn't many. But then all of a sudden, there's been this huge explosion, which is exactly why you guys are on the call at the moment. You've seen it in your organization more than likely. You've heard about it. It's really just taken a whole life of its own. And obviously, it's something that has changed the landscape dramatically. So now that we understand how that happens and what the attack vector is, it's important to build your defenses around that. Now, I guess the thing is too, there's multiple ways of infection. So obviously there's the ransomware that's going to scan through the internet or scan through your network and look for unpatched devices or be pushed out via applications. But there's also a phishing component as well. And we're seeing that the phishing component, while it doesn't spread as quickly, is still just as devastating in terms of causing damage within the organization, and some of them are even using a blended approach. And so phishing as a whole and these scanning style attacks are what we're seeing as being some of the most prolific and most dangerous to organizations as it stands right now, and not just from ransomware but across the board. So in order to protect yourself from these, it's important, first of all, that you understand where the critical assets are within your organization. So what is it that you would not want to be released to the world? If it was damaged, what would it, would it hurt you? If it was stolen, would it hurt you? What is it that you want to protect? And it doesn't just have to be data, it could be infrastructure, it could be anything, depending on the nature of the business. And so you want to build essentially a fortress around that. And not only do you want to build a fortress around that, you want to build gate points and restrictions and the ability to slow down an attack if you are breached. As an example, if you had a ransomware break into your network and it was scanning through your environment, is it able to scan every single host in your environment, or is it only able to attack a certain subset of that environment? And then also we put in backups here specifically around that defense system as well. So backups obviously, and as Kevin said, we've spoken about backups for years, how important they are. But a lot of people don't test them. They don't do them necessarily well. And also it's very important to potentially have like offline backups as well. Don't leave them on your network, again, where they can be encrypted. Take them offline and store them in an external facility and test them regularly. All of this is core to your defense system. So from a network level, there is a number of things here that you can you need to implement into your organization. Now, I would assume that most of you on the call have most of these in place. You have a good mail infrastructure, firewalls, you have AV scanning on your gateways, proxies checking outbound, etc. It's pretty common, and this is where the majority of IT budget or IT security budget tends to go, is onto these technical controls. Now, the one thing that's actually very important that, from my experience in the consulting world, I've seen is usually lacking in a lot of environments is network segmentation. And so segmentation, like I said before, it's providing choke points or gateways or components in your network that stop things from being able to spread. From my experience in ethical hacking as well as consultancies, if you get onto the internal network of most organizations, you are able to then run through the environment largely unimpeded. And that's from us sitting on the environment. These days, through the phishing attacks, people are now able to sit on your network from the other side of the world. And so it's very important to set up segmentation if you haven't already. Then we've got the software controls. So software controls, I mean, patching is king. And I mean, you guys have heard that thousands of times before. But it still it's still the truth. We see at the moment with WannaCry and the like, these are still exploiting vulnerabilities that have been patched, and in most cases have been patched for months, or should have been patched for months. A patch has been available for them. And this again comes down from the ethical hacking side of view, as well as from a phishing and ransomware point of view. This is one of the things that will make the biggest difference to your security posture across the board, but obviously it is extremely difficult to do and extremely difficult to do right. Now, you also need to have your AVs, your local firewalls, things like that. I mean, that's pretty common. Most people have that, as well as ways to protect your shared drives, Dropbox, things like that. These are the Dropbox in particular, OneDrive, all of those, they're becoming quite common, and these can also be attacked and scanned while you're doing from a ransomware attack. So these things need to be taken into consideration. Things like segregation of data, permissions, that sort of thing. How can you reduce the impact that you're going to have if a ransomware exploit happens to start to encrypt one of these solutions? And again, what's your backup strategy? So then we move into people. Now, again, most IT spend has been spent on the technical controls. I mean, historically, that's where people spend their money. They buy a device or a bit of software, they can see it, they can play with it. It's usually easier to justify a spend for those. Whereas now with these new style of attacks, the people are the ones that are typically getting targeted the most. Phishing attacks obviously focus on them directly. A lot of the ransomware focused on them directly. And these people are usually the weakest point in the organization. And this can be changed. It takes some effort and it takes some time, and there's no quick fix. But you can make these people valuable, not just from earning you money, but also from protecting you. And so the way you do that, first of all, you need to define responsibilities and accountability. People need to know what they're responsible for and what they're accountable for. And in this new age of IT security, it's no longer the security team that is ultimately responsible or accountable. It's now the users, and it needs to be understood by them that this is the case. And you need to give them tools and the ability to understand this. Now, one of the ways that you can do this is through policies or process and procedures. And so we can set up these environments and these rules that say, okay, for example, if you've got customer data, you are not allowed to send that out over the internet via Gmail or unencrypted or whatever it is. You can set up these boundaries, and by setting up these boundaries and letting people understand exactly what they are allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do, it helps you enforce that responsibility and accountability. And again, it's really about changing the culture within the organization. We then move on to just the general security awareness training and phishing awareness training. And so we've seen, obviously, security awareness has been done for a long time, but typically it's done in a way that people don't engage with. Most people don't enjoy doing technical training. They're not technical people in most instances. And so you need to have a technical training that's built to their level, that people enjoy, that they're happy to get involved with, and that takes that fear factor out of it for them. So they actually engage, they enjoy, they feel like they're part of the program. You know, they're not out to be tricked, they're out to be helped. And it really changes, again, and I'm going to keep on talking about this in this section, is changing the culture, making the people part of the solution rather than part of the problem, get them involved and give them ways that they can get involved and feel like they're involved. Incident response, now this is more obviously for the tech team in the organization, but these guys are vital. You know, when things go wrong, and things will go wrong, they need to have an incident response plan. They need to have been trained in it. They need to know exactly what to do and how to do it and what order to do it. Vitally important. And then also we need to make sure that all of this is endorsed from the top of the tree. The boss in the organization, the CEO, whoever it is, they're the ones that need to be communicating this out to the organization, saying this is actually a really big issue. This is something that we care about, and this is something that we need to address. And by getting it to come from that level, you're going to get a lot stronger buy-in, and again, it's all about changing the culture. If it's coming from the top, it makes it so much easier to enact these changes. Now, another thing that's often overlooked is early warning systems. So again, you're going to be attacked at some point. How do you make sure that you know about it as quick as possible? And that's really the key. Get in, understand it very early, very quickly. So some of the things that we recommend you need are things like SIEM devices, so log correlation and checking out logging, etc. Make sure that you understand exactly what's going on within the organization. Also, you need to, your staff are some of the best people to help you create an early warning system. And some of the techniques we've seen are saying to users, okay, if you get a spam email or a scam email, whatever it is, report it to X address. And there seems to be varying degrees of success with that style of attack. And so what we wanted to do was create a system that allows people to report quickly and easy with one click. And so we've actually just released what we call our Scam Reporter, and it's an Outlook plugin, and we are providing this for free at no cost to you guys. We'll send out an email afterwards, and you can use this across your organization, and it will basically allows people to report phishing emails with one click, along with other things as well. And by getting people to report and to view and to correlate, it vastly changes your ability to react, to respond, and also to get people involved and make them feel good. Now, another thing that's often overlooked is testing yourself. So you send out, let's say your web application developers. They come to you and say, yeah, our application's secure. We follow secure coding practices or whatever it is, or yep, our desktops are hardened, we do all the patching, or all of these different areas. That's all nice for them to say that, but you need to get verification. Now, if you're under requirement for certain compliance statutes, then you're going to have to do that as part of that. But even if you're not, it's really important to get external validation. So things like penetration testing, as an example, or the ongoing phishing assessments, that sort of thing. The ability to identify where you're weak, to build solid metrics around that, and then over the course of time, really build up on those areas to really boost your risk profile, to make it a lot more solid. And again, something that we're just about to release, and this is free. We are just releasing essentially a ransomware simulator that you guys will be able to download, run it up on any device you want, and it will test your device to see if you're vulnerable without causing any damage to a number of different style ransom attacks. And so when this is released in a couple of weeks' time, we will send you an email, give you access to this. Again, it's totally free. It's just something that we're trying to help guys out with and give to the community. So you've really, now you've gone through, you've created your environment, you've trained your people, you've got a bunch of systems and policies and procedures in place. Now it's time to practice these and to drill these. And the question, the quote I love here is, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. So that's a Mike Tyson quote there, and it's really true. And unless you practice, unless you drill constantly, you're really going to be unprepared when it actually happens. And so a number of the things here that you need to practice are your backup recovery. So as an example that Kevin gave before, if your backups have been encrypted, you're not going to know unless you're actually practicing often. That's a good way of understanding if they have been encrypted. Are your backups just not working? Is there something wrong with your backup system? That happens all the time. How long does it take you to restore a system? How long is it going to take you to restore all systems? If you are doing that, what issues are you finding along the way? There's so many key points here that you'll run into by practicing, and you don't want to be finding this out live during an incident. Ongoing phishing simulation, I mentioned that before. This is one of those things where you want your users to get as much experience with friendly style phishing emails, to not just to trick them, but to help them stay aware, to help them stay vigilant, and to help them learn what it takes to build that environment, to build that capability. And this is the sort of thing that should be going almost continuously to everyone in your organization. And again, the incident response. So incident response is really vital, and it's one of those things that a lot of people don't practice. And so let's move into what happens during an incident. So really, the first thing obviously is you need to identify the attack, and we've covered off a number of those early warning systems that will help you do that. Then it's time to move into your incident response plan, and this will really dictate what you need to do. There is a few things there that are sort of common. So for example, containment. Make sure that if you are attacked, it's not going to spread across the whole environment. Contain it as quick as you possibly can. Then you need to also evaluate the problem. So once it's contained, it's not going to cause any more damage, let's have a look at it, see what it is, see how it got in, understand a little bit more about it. And depending on the situation, if it's a mission critical device, you might just want to take a copy of it and then run it up later on and restore the device. So then you move into the extinguish phase, removing the malware, however that's going to be done, again through backup or however. And then there's that recovery component. And so once you're recovered and once you're back to 100% production value, then it's time to move into your post-incident reporting. So obviously you want to run an investigation. So how did it happen? Was it a piece of malware that came through the email system that was executed on the back of an attachment? Was it scanned? There's a number of different ways that you could be attacked. Do you need to report it to the authorities, particularly? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Depends on the environment you live in. Depends on what happens. And what are the lessons that have been learned from this? This is one of the most important things, is to perform a lessons learned and then use that information to continue to improve your capability. And then obviously a post-incident reporting, which then helps you report back to the board, etc., and hopefully maybe even get some more funding to fix some of the things that went wrong. So really, just as a quick summary there, it's very important to understand your landscape. I think we've done that quite clearly. The landscape has definitely changed. The old style of attacks, while still being there, aren't the ones that are the most devastating anymore. Once you understand what the attack vector is, you need to then work out how you can protect against that type of attack, which includes training your people, setting up early warning systems, etc. When you do end up being attacked, you're going to have to make sure that you survive, and in the quickest, easiest way possible, reduce the overhead, reduce the pain that it's going to cause you, and get back on your feet. And then once you've done that, it's time to move into the learning component and evolve from these lessons, and then repeat, go through all of that again, keep on enhancing your environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Damien and Kevin. That's fantastic. Look, I just thought I'd share with you very quickly the poll results. The first poll, which asked about whether you've experienced ransomware attacks in the last 2 years, 38% of people indicated they had. This is very consistent with Kevin's statistics, which is encouraging. The second poll discussed the biggest challenge you have in terms of addressing ransomware, and 58% of people indicated staff awareness was their major challenge. 26% indicated policy, and 16% indicated that their vulnerability management was the issue. So look, I think we've had a really good session, and I think we'll leave it open for probably just the one question at this stage. Only one's come through, and I'll hand it over to Kevin for a quick couple of minutes in response. Kevin, the question was, how do I communicate the threat of ransomware to our executives in a way that they will understand?
Oh, that's a good question. I think whenever technical staff are trying to communicate with an executive team, it really boils down to vocabulary. How do we speak their language and communicate the severity of the issue? And for something like ransomware, I think maybe the best solution might be to frame it in maybe a disaster recovery kind of situation. Executives are familiar with natural disasters. I mean, we just had this horrible hurricane in Houston, Texas, and we have horrible flooding. And well, if all of the data in the organization is encrypted, that is another disaster. How do we recover from that kind of an issue? I think that might be a good way to get across the threat of ransomware to an executive that may not be able to understand the IT-related issues that go along with it.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. That's great. All right, look, we haven't had any other questions come through, so hopefully today we've provided you with some clarity about ransomware and provided real insight into the hype as well as some of the hurt. I think we can all agree that there is a fair amount of pain potential out there with respect to ransomware. More importantly, we've presented some of those cost-effective tactics that Damien went through that can hopefully help provide you with some great first or next steps in your battle with ransomware. We'd like to thank you again for attending today's session. Please help us create better webinars in the future by completing the survey at the end of this session and letting us know what topics you would like us to cover into the future. Everyone from today will receive a copy of the recording via email, and we'll also be posting today's session up on our website. So thank you again and have a great day.